Greetings and salutations, viewers and listeners. Welcome to episode 111 of Word Ninjas Live. We're 11D1 today, and we're taking on some very heavy topics this week. So, kind of as a preemptive warning, we are covering controversial content, squicks, and triggers this week, and just what is the differentiation between the three different concepts? How do they all intermix, or how are they different? And how can we handle them in our literature, in our art, in all the creative things that we do? It's not going to be an easy topic, but it's something that should be addressed and thought about and discussed. But if you have significant issues with talks about triggers or anything, this is your warning now. If you want to skip it, we understand, but we're going to dive into it. But first, hey, how about we introduce ourselves before I forget and just jump right in. I'm your instigator of creative and literary insanity, as always, Charles. Joining me tonight are my brave co-hosts, Will.
Hello, everyone.
And a very tired Justin.
Yep, I'm also here, but I'm good to go. We're good.
Does that mean that you want to start things off if you're so good?
No. I don't have a whole lot of personal experience with this topic, so I'm going to make uninformed commentary that people can correct me on.
You've never done anything controversial ever in any of your writing?
Oh, no, I have, but if you're going to talk about the differences, I have things to say, but they're probably not going to be received well. So I'll let you guys lead, and I'll poke in every now and then with my own comments.
So you're going to create the controversy as examples during the show?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's start things off with just what actually constitutes controversial content, which is actually the hardest of the three to pin down, because effectively almost anything, or basically anything, can be controversial. Because controversy basically boils down to differences. And for artistic and creative endeavors, it basically would fall under differences in demographics that society or culture deems a minority, unusual, potentially unwanted, or even idolized. It can go in the opposite direction as well. I was thinking on my way home that it's basically anything that does not have a black or white answer or reasoning behind it can become controversial. But then I thought, even recently, we've been reading about how some people have differences of opinions on how math should work, which is, I feel like, one of the most basic black and white concepts the global society has. It's one of the few things we as humans pretty much agree on nowadays. That basically
As
all
long as you don't bring up the metric system versus the English system, then you're usually fine.
Well, that's more measurements than
math.
arithmetic. But I was thinking basically anything that falls under the PEMDAS rules is basically globally accepted as truth. Except for some people who now question why 1 times 1 equals 1 rather than 2.
And also, I was reading an article just recently about something about the stock market. And when the information...
How it's crappy?
No. Hey, I'm on the stock market. So when a piece of information was released, within 4 nanoseconds, some people in, I think, Chicago made some transactions to capitalize on that information. However, they were far enough away where 4 nanoseconds was faster than the speed of light it would take for that information to travel. So they could prove that there's insider trading because they wouldn't have been able to get that information just physically. And of course, lawyers tried to change the laws of physics and say that it was possible, and that didn't work. And some people might remember when the gravitational constant was changed at one point, by our Congress. It was quickly reversed, but at one point there was some law. I don't remember why they changed it, but it benefited a lawyer in some way, I'm sure, or his client.
It was an
Uh,
absurd phrasing, I think, from what I remember about that.
yeah, it was something about I don't even know. I don't even want to make a
It
guess.
was not intended, as far as I could tell.
No. And so I would consider those two things extremely controversial because I am math, and I don't like when math is abused.
You are a math man?
Yes. I don't like when you have a differential equation and you divide both sides by dx. That doesn't. That's not an arithmetic operator. That's
But
a
what could go
shortcut.
wrong?
That's a shortcut for people, but it's not arithmetic. It doesn't. You can't do that. It's not a thing.
Can we divide it by 0 instead?
You actually can. We've actually have rules about that, and you can do that. But you cannot divide. It'd be like dividing an equation by the integral symbol. That no, stop, no. So yes, even something as forefront as math, something that we as a global society have agreed upon thousands of years ago, can be controversial. The real question is, how do we handle the controversy?
Obviously, by having completely respectable and honest discussions with people, where we give our opinions and then listen to other people's opinions and respect those opinions, and everyone gets along, even if they disagree.
I want to live in that world.
Might be a little boring, but that would be nice.
Probably
Sorry,
get a lot
what you
more
were
done.
saying.
Oh, I always just like to think as controversial as anything where multiple people can have differing opinions on it and believe strongly on their opinion of it. You've got controversy. And unfortunately, that can be pretty much everything.
Yeah,
Apparently.
any unyielding opinion held by somebody will become a controversial anything down the line.
Yep.
I mean, the big heavy hitters that most people acknowledge as controversial are like religion and politics, and sometimes sports.
That's why I don't talk about religion, politics, or sports.
And
Basically, the things to avoid at work or family functions.
Yes, I think I made it clear to CJ like a year ago or even longer when I joined in to this group. No religion and politics ever. Ever. Unless you're writing about a book that has religious and or political content. Then you could discuss it. In the context of the text that you're writing. And we've done, I think we're 100% on that. Even this episode, I think we're going to avoid all that discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a note of it. I'm not really going to dive into specific controversies within sports and or politics. Or
really
religion or any of those things. Although politics is becoming a sport the way things are going.
Oh, great. Now he's made a controversial opinion.
We're doomed.
Wow.
Well, I filled that part of the talkie point then. Then someone else has to create a squick, and then someone else will have to be triggered, and we'll have the trifecta.
Actually, I will be talking about a novel that I'm writing currently that has a massive trigger in the first chapter.
Well, that leaves the Squicks to Will then.
I'm good at Squicks.
But before we dive into Squicks, just how has controversial content been handled in stories and other creative endeavors in the past within our own works, and how do we feel we could handle that or suggest others handle that? Because basically everything and anything can be controversial depending on the audience that views it. So it's effectively unavoidable.
The way I sort of handle it in my own works is that I try to realize who my audience is when I'm writing. and I try to write to cater to that audience somewhat. And if there's going to be something controversial, I try to lead up to it so that somebody can get comfortable knowing that it's going to come up, or they can just abandon ship before it gets too heady.
Or it's something that's most likely going to appear soon.
Right. And also, like the aforementioned novel that I'm writing, that's going to be something that's basically going to be on the inside cover as like the little synopsis. Hey, this happens, like basically immediately. So enter at your own risk. And I think as artists, we should be talking about things that are occasionally upsetting and occasionally controversial. I think that's part of the art, and I think that's how humanity ultimately deals with these controversial topics through reading and through catharsism. And if somebody knows that they're going to have, like a panic attack reading, or watching the movie Arachnophobia, then they should probably not watch Arachnophobia instead of trying to ban the movie Arachnophobia from all video stores and digital media.
I highly regretted ever watching that movie.
It's actually kind of comical in modern day.
It probably does
not for some
age
of us,
well, but for the time.
Yes. You probably weren't a huge fan of that one scene in The Thing either.
I don't think I've seen that. Or at least not that I remember.
I won't ruin it on the podcast because it's a very good scene.
Fair enough. Then you'd create controversy.
Yes. Oh man, the spoiler controversy. Like, you can't spoil anything that was like the Captain Phillips movie when that came out. People were complaining about spoilers, even though it was a historical event. Everyone knows how it ends already. And it was in the newspapers like just a year ago. And so I think we're at the point, and this is where things are going to get controversial and we're going to get a lot of angry emails. I'm of the opinion that we try to latch on to as much controversy as we can for the sake of being part of a conversation. And I think that a lot of people that are, what would be the verb for controversial? I don't want to say contrived because that's a different word. But anyways, people who find something controversial and have to post about it on Tumblr or Twitter or some social media are not actually really offended and almost rarely actually affected by whatever conversation that they're talking about. They just like to be on a bandwagon and be along for the ride.
It's very true.
You can send all angry emails to charlesmuir@hotmail.com.
I feel sorry for that person.
That's kind of the thing, though, if you're going to make controversial content, you have to expect people to be angry with you for expressing your side of the controversy. Because there are people that are going to agree with you that are already on your side. There are people who are going to be like, whatever, maybe they'll be informed and agree with you and join your side or just not care. And then there are the people who are going to disagree with you. And because internet, they are going to be very vehemently vocal about their disagreement with you. And you just have to take that in stride and be like, well, that's your opinion and this is my opinion. And if you don't like it, don't read my book. But we should definitely not ban or silence the talk about controversial content, because it's through talking about it that eventually maybe an outcome can be reached.
Or at least a mutual understanding of the topic.
Yeah. Some kind of agreement.
Because even with things like mathematics, it is not always black and white. There are multiple possible ways you can talk about it and multiple opinions you can have about it while still being correct or potentially right on all sides. Even if you vehemently disagree with each other.
Right, and there's often cultural differences, and yeah, I sort of hate that cop-out where it's a different culture, you have to accept it for what it is, because for some stuff, no, I don't really have to. But I'm also not over there, yelling at people for their culture. I don't hang out in the Bible Belt yelling at televangelists. I don't care. You can do whatever you want. It's not bothering me. And if people want to give you money for faith, then go for it. Whatever. I don't have a problem with it. And that's kind of how I take my stand on most things. I really don't care. It doesn't affect me. And I wish more people felt like I did, where it just stop caring. And go ahead.
I think there's a big difference in accepting the controversy and just acknowledging the controversy, like based on culture or religion or politics or whatever. You don't have to accept someone else's position if it's like the polar opposite of yours, as if you really seriously can't understand why they would take that position. So long as you acknowledge it. There is a big difference between acknowledgement and acceptance. And I think most cultures seem to automatically ignore the acknowledgement aspect and just think, if you don't accept this, then you're in the wrong, so F you.
Well, no one wants to give the other side credence, because what that basically shows is a sign of weakness for your own opinion. And so you basically have to be black and white in your opinion in order to stand. And you see this a lot in the aforementioned religion and politics, where you might have an opinion, but you shouldn't say any of that opinion because you may not be representing your constituents. And so if you want to be reelected the next year, then you better follow your constituents. And, that's actually kind of a good thing. That's like your job and what you're supposed to do. And I don't know where else I was going with that. But, yeah, controversy bad.
But earlier you said controversy good.
Oh, wait, no, yeah, controversy good.
Now you're creating contradictions.
Oh, no, the worst kind of controversy.
In literature good.
People getting up in arms about controversy.
It's perfectly acceptable to... What was that?
Don't start wars about it.
I think it's perfectly acceptable to have differing opinions and to be it's even okay to be like emotionally involved in your opinion based off of someone else's. The biggest thing is to acknowledge that there are other possible positions and perspectives and opinions. They are not inherently wrong just because you have a differing one, and vice versa.
And I'm going to use the perfect example of CJ and I constantly talking about finances. In our last meeting, there were things that I very carefully said in the form of, okay, I don't agree with this particular point. I'm going to lay out my reasons why. But I also know you have a differing opinion. And ultimately, since you're the CEO, it's your prerogative to make the opinion and make the decisions that you feel will better the company. And I thought I was very respectable, hopefully, during that conversation. There was other previous conversations where I don't think I was as respectful, because I was shocked at what was going on, and I kind of made it clear that I was shocked when I first heard about it. But for most of the stuff now, I'm just like, this is my opinion, and this is the direction I think we should go, and I'm going to support you no matter what you choose.
Yeah, two things about that. Yes, the two of us do have very differing opinions on multiple aspects of the endeavors we're working on, but...
Not just financially, just in general.
Yeah. But, like you said, we discuss it. And the important thing that you just mentioned that is also applicable to all of this is you told me your perspective on it and why you're coming at it from that perspective and opinion and platform. That helps give me context in regards to your perspective and why you have that perspective. Having that context helps me understand why you're so different from my opinions. And I don't think I've been as good necessarily as giving you my context so you can better understand why I'm where I'm at in certain aspects.
I think as reality man I can imply a lot of context sometimes.
True.
But I'm going to jump onto your point even further and say that nothing, because I already forgot what your point was. Oh, yes. This is why it's important when you're writing to provide that context. Your character shouldn't be doing something completely out of the blue. There should be a context. And I'm not saying the context has to be revealed immediately right before the controversial action happens, but you should provide at least some context at some point in your writing so that you can provide the reader with information on why the character did what they did. That's why a lot of people focus so much on world building and character creation and backstory.
Mm.
It's actually one of my favorite things to read.
Because there's
I did not catch that last part from Will. You're breaking up a bit.
Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
Oh.
Whoops. So yeah, I think it's important to establish your character based on the world he grew up in, the culture, the history, and his own past and childhood and his decision-making process. And again, you don't have to reveal it right away. You can reveal it over time, and that can be a thread of your plot. But it's definitely something that should be discussed, or you're going to have a disconnect with your reader, and they're not going to believe anything else that you write.
Yeah. Timely example, since I just finished book 3 of a currently 4-book series. I don't know if there's going to be more, but Sarah J. Maas is writing, forget what the series is called, but there are deaths of relatively prominent characters in the series, but she hints as to what potentially is going to happen, sometimes even a chapter or 2 ahead of time, so you know it's going to go sideways, and it's not going to be pretty. You don't know the specifics until it happens, but there are forewarnings. Even in the last 3 chapters of the 3rd book, someone dies, and it made me angry, but that is my personal opinion. I liked that character. She almost telegraphed what was going to happen because there were 4 potential people who could die, and it was inevitable one would die, but each one kind of had the Chekhov's gun set up. It was just a matter of which one was going to go off. But you could see something was going to go down. So if something like death was a trigger, then you'd know well enough that, okay, I'm going to bow out now because it's not going to be pleasant otherwise. So having some form of telegraph to show what's going to potentially happen in the writing really does help.
I think a great example, naming the chapter Red Wedding.
Obviously, everyone was just in red, and it was a theme.
Yeah, and everything was fine.
They were being festive.
I thought it was amazing that people didn't see that coming just by the title alone. But I think the title of the chapter was subtle enough where it could have really meant anything. And it was brutal. More brutal than probably most people expected. But it was somewhat telegraphed. And especially the opening part of what happened. The first couple snippets of scene, you're like, uh-oh, something really bad's about to happen. And so you can bow out really quickly.
Although I have a feeling if you've gotten that far within that series,
you're probably okay.
Accepting of that type of content.
Right.
All right, let's move on to Squicks, because for some this is a relatively less known or understood aspect of this trio. But Squicks are basically the middle ground that are generally instigated by controversial content. It is something that makes you uncomfortable, either emotionally or even physically. It can make you cringe, wince, shudder, or even grumble a little bit, it is not triggering. There is a clear difference between the two that we'll get into more detail once we get into triggers. But because this is a lesser known aspect of like degrees in how much it affects a person, it's become kind of a gray area online, as I feel like we all commented on offline. But it is something that does need to be addressed because it is something that regularly appears in literature, in art, in all sorts of creative content. And what was the Urban Dictionary description that I tossed in there? The physical sense of repulsion upon encountering a concept or situation one finds disgusting. But that's the problem with Squicks versus triggers, is there is a significant overlap in what could be a squick or trigger. For some, certain content can be just uncomfortable. Like for me, spiders. I do not have a full-on phobia of spiders, but I know several people who do. For them, it is a trigger. For me, it is just a squick. Like, I will physically wince and cringe and not be happy if I see them. Most of the time, if I can, I make them go squish. Because I do not care for them.
Is that what the name Squick comes from? Is from squicking all the spiders?
For me, yes. I believe it's kind of like an unofficial mash of
Squirm,
cringe, and like ack or something like that. I saw a couple different options when I was looking into it. But basically, anything that is controversial could become a squick for some people if it makes them physically or emotionally uncomfortable.
And that's sort of... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add, just like controversial content, squicks should be acknowledged, respected, but also something that we should still write content on.
Right, and I think it's also a good tool to elicit purposefully that squick in your reader so that you can feel what the character is feeling. And there's a line, and unfortunately, as creative people, we can't really decide where that line is for every individual person. They have to decide for themselves. So, at least for me, I don't censor anything that I write. I consider, and I'll talk about this when we talk about triggers, I consider, where the line is for probably most people. My line is, I have a high tolerance for stuff like this, and I actually go out and seek out squick feelings. I actually enjoy when I have a nightmare. I get an adrenaline rush. I feed off my own fight or flight syndrome. I browse r/what the fuck all the time. I just saw a thing where, and this isn't gross unless you saw the pictures, but basically a bone basically coming out of somebody's body. And I was like, oh, this is interesting, because it wasn't a broken bone. It was just a rogue bone that happened to be floating around the body. Long story, people can look it up if they want, but it was really gross to see, but it was also fascinating, and I love that kind of stuff. But I also know some people don't love that kind of stuff. So that stuff can be in its own little hole in the deep, dark internet, and people can go there if they look for it. But you probably shouldn't be taking pictures of it and putting up billboards of that thing.
Yeah, that would probably not go over very well.
And that's sort of the horror genre thing, where if you can basically say to the person that's going to view your content, oh, by the way, this is a horror something, based on marketing or whatever, the cover art or the title of the novel, they're going to get a pretty good idea that, oh, this is in the horror genre, I am not interested. I've got a friend who loves the sick garbage that I watch and will watch it with me, and I've got another friend that absolutely hates it. And so when I go over for, discussing horror movie night this month, I will invite the person that likes it, and I will leave the person that doesn't like it uninvited. And I will have a different party for him where I watch all the comedy horror movies, because those can be hilarious. And so, again, much like the controversy stuff, I don't think you should censor, because everyone's going to react to it differently. But you should at least broadcast what your content is. Like if anyone was going to look into My Roommate's a Stripper, they're going to know pretty quickly what that content is, and they're not going to be shocked and appalled like a book and a half or a chapter and a half through.
I should hope so. But I also make sure I tag, which is another thing. If you're posting content online and you think you have Squicks, always make sure you tag it. Like, only once did I have to use a non-consensual tag, but that is a big Squick and for some people trigger. You definitely want to make it known that that's in whatever you're working on.
Thankfully, social media and Tumblr and other blog sites make it very easy to tag your work in such ways so that you can kind of telegraph that to potential viewers.
Right, and if you're going to have something, potentially actually triggering or, spoiler territory, you can put up front at the beginning of your blog post, spoiler warning for Metal Gear Solid 5, and there's going to be some of that next episode, which I'm going to dance around very, very quietly. Only 20% of our audience got that fun. And so, you should put up a spoiler warning or a trigger warning at the start if there's going to be something to that effect. And I'll leave that off until we get into the triggering segment. So people could potentially have listened up to this point.
Let's see, what else did we have? Show notes. Yeah, I feel like we've more or less covered what a squick is and how to handle it. Basically the same lines as controversial, just adding in tagging as a thing, but also understand that what may be a squick for you is not necessarily going to be a squick for others, and vice versa. Everyone has their own things that they want to avoid and things that they need to avoid as best they can. As long as you acknowledge that such things are out there and be respectful of it and do your best to tag or telegraph within your writing as best you can, it is appreciated and becoming more the standard and par for the course for how to handle this content. Which leads us into the more dangerous option of actual triggers, which are actually elicit a physical or psychological reaction to the content, which can actually induce an anxiety or panic attack, or just that level of state of emotions.
I'm going to tell a quick story that's not related to triggers to try to give this segment context for something that I'm going to bring up later. I was at the library working in Hartford University, or University of Hartford, sorry, I can't get that wrong. And working in the library, and this is when the whole, ADD thing was going on, where everyone was being diagnosed all of a sudden with ADD. And I sort of wrote the whole thing off as a bunch of garbage. And that's unfortunate. And something that I didn't realize was that that was a real condition. And I found that out because while I was working at the library, I was talking to this person. He was like, oh, how do I, print my report? I'm having trouble with the printer. So I walk over there. and I start explaining it to him, and then he just kind of gets up and walks away. And I'm like, oh, that was odd. And then he comes back, and he's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that I just did that. It's just, I have this problem. And then I was like, oh, you're the person people are actually talking about with ADD. You are actually experiencing this. And it's unfortunate that ADD has been such overprescribed, at least in my opinion, speaking of controversy, overprescribed and overdiagnosed, because it almost sort of negates the people who really have that problem. And yes, there's going to be a spectrum, obviously. I'm not going to say that there's not varying degrees of it. But you shouldn't try to assign yourself to something just because you're having a little bit of difficulty. If you're on the low end of the spectrum, you should at least try as your personal goal to yourself to try to not fall into that category and not, play the victim. Now, if you're actually having experiences where you're having, attention deficit disorder, or, obviously there's the autism controversy, then yes, you should get medical help and you should get psychological help. But I see a lot of people, my wife's a teacher, and I have a couple friends that are teachers, that basically every child gets what's called an IEP, which means they get special treatment, and it's not because they have a medical condition. It's because they want, and this doesn't apply to everybody, but there are some kids there that have it just because they want the special treatment. It's like the anxiety dogs on planes. Everyone can just go to the doctor and get their dog registered to be an anxiety dog, and then they get to fly with their dog on the plane. And it kind of, spits in the face of the people that actually have that problem. It's like parking in a handicapped parking space when you're not handicapped. And that bothers me because I'm seeing that a lot on social media when it comes to triggers, where people are saying everything is triggering to them all the time. And it's frustrating to see that, because there are people who get legitimately triggered by content, and that should be addressed. And when you kind of blanket everything over as everything is 100% triggering to 100% people all the time, and you shouldn't be posting this on Reddit, and I'm going to downvote you, then that's not appropriate either, because then we can't have an open discussion about where those lines actually are. And so that's just been so frustrating on social media lately. So I want to kind of relate my opinion, speaking of controversy, to the ADD thing, to kind of give you a sense of how I feel about the whole everything is suddenly triggering and super controversial all the time now.
Yeah, effectively, anything could be triggering to someone, yes. But that's just like Squicks or just controversial content in general. But I think people are definitely kind of losing track of the specific aspects of what a trigger does to a person versus just what makes you uncomfortable.
Right, and an example, albeit probably an absurd example, would be if my father died on a specific day, and so when that day rolls around on that anniversary, I get really depressed and upset, and I cry. None of this is true, by the way, for those who are listening. For me personally, but this is just a made-up story for this. But then I go, you know what? This day is so upsetting to me. No one can have a birthday on August 7th anymore. If I see one more party, I don't know what I'm going to do, so just no one have fun on August 7th, because August 7th is specifically triggering to me because of my father's death. And if that's the case, then yes, that day is triggering to you, and that's fine. I'm not going to discount that. I think there are better ways to handle that, but fine. The thing is that you shouldn't be imposing your triggering ways. Oh, that was a bad turn of phrase. Can we cut the video live feed too, or is that all live? You shouldn't be imposing rules on society based on your own personal triggers and squicks and beliefs on controversy. And now I'm off my soapbox. I have nothing more to add.
I know for me, I have the squick of spiders. They make me very uncomfortable, but they don't trigger me outright or anything. Any content in regards to suicide, however, will send me into a spiral of negativity that'll take me a day up to a week to get out of, which is why I do my best to personally avoid any such content. Because for me, there's very specific connotations with that I have trouble avoiding if I read that content, and then I'm just lost for a little while. I do not impose that restriction upon others. I only impose it upon myself because I know what it'll do to me. So I do my best to avoid any such content. So when I see those trigger warnings, which is convenient tagging on Tumblr and blogs and whatnot, I can actually avoid that. Or if I see it coming up potentially in books I'm reading, I can bow out.
But CJ, just the other day, I watched you. You did a search on Amazon for all the things that triggered you, and then you were giving them all 1-star reviews and saying this book is awful. You should definitely not read it. You've got a rich history of 1-star reviews on Amazon. I'm surprised they even let you on the store anymore.
If you've been looking at my internet history, that raises questions.
Well, that's not the only thing.
That's all you're commenting on.
Now, we should talk about how to deal with writing about triggering content. And I think there's no better person to start that conversation than myself, because I'm currently writing something that's extremely triggering. So I'm going to say it up right now. For the next probably 5 or 10 minutes or so, I'm going to be bringing up a school shooting, because that's what I'm writing about. That being said, now I will talk about it and how I'm writing about it. When the Sandy Hook shooting took place, I was extremely affected by it, and I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, maybe not in great detail, but I had a lot of empathy for everyone that was involved. My wife worked at the school the year before. She knew all the children and all the teachers that were killed, and I basically spent a week depressed, and I couldn't get out of it until I decided to write about it. And the writing process has been very therapeutic and cathartic for me. So I've been going through that and writing. And the first draft of the opening scenes where the school shooting took place was very graphic. And even I recognized it was too graphic, especially for a general audience. I'm not really expecting a general audience to read this book because of its content, and it is going to be horror-based. So I'm really sort of catering to the horror fans. But even I went too far. And there's this thing, less is more. And this is important in writing because people that are reading your work, they have an imagination, and they can fill in the blanks in whatever they're comfortable with. If you leave a lot behind the scenes and behind a closed door, people can read that, and if they decide they kind of want to gloss over it and not think about it anymore, you can leave them that option. And if they want to fill in their own weird, sick details in their own head about what's going on, then that's their right to do. But to try to force a reader to experience something so traumatic is probably not great, especially if it's what I would call on camera, even though it's a book. So what I did is I rewrote that entire scene where the father of one of the kids is not actually at the school. It was originally written where he was a teacher there, and he experienced a lot of the massacre firsthand. And I thought that was too much. So I backed it off, and now he's just a father that's, working from his day job and hears about it on the news or gets a phone call from the school. So the content is there, but it's going to come in the form of news reports and the aftermath, and not really focus so much on the act itself. And I think that's kind of how you want to handle stuff that's obviously and extremely triggering. This could apply to rape scenes, things of that nature. Obviously, a lot of artists will disagree, especially if you've seen movies like Irreversible, where there's prominent scenes as such. But most people can read a quick review of that work, Irreversible, and know immediately what it's about. And if they do any research whatsoever, they'll figure out what it's about and just not watch it. And even stuff like that, I find a little bit too much, and I try to back off and try to bring people together. And I want you to experience what I went through and what a parent goes through when they lose a child. And I want to broadcast that that's what the book is going to be about. So if you have lost a child and this is going to be triggering for you and you've read the inside cover, you've got all you need to put the book back and not read it. And I'm writing it so that it's broadcasted what happens, but you're not actually there. So I'm kind of trying to make it, as little triggering as possible, because the novel itself is not about the school shooting. It's about what the father goes through after the school shooting, and that's what's really important and what I'm really writing about. And I think the context of his story needs to start with the shooting, and it needs to be addressed and brought up and written about. But I don't have to, put the camera in the killer's hand, basically, while it's all going down. First person, original Doom video game style. Doesn't need to be that. And so that's kind of how I deal with triggering content.
I'm not quite sure how to follow that up.
Oh, Will's breaking up on my end.
Same
all
here.
the way down to even getting warning for you talking about it. I said, I think you handled it well, even down to the warning before you even started talking about it. That's how we should handle talking about and writing about triggering content.
Right, and this is something that happened to me, and I need to express it, and I hope that people reading my book can use it as therapy, or reading the process of reading it would be cathartic for them. But it's important to broadcast immediately what that's going to be about, so people can choose to go down that path or not.
And writing about it because you have a reasoning behind why you want to cover that content is how to actually handle triggering content and why you should be discussing or writing such content. Don't just do it for shock value because it's controversial or could potentially trigger people if you blindside them.
Right. I don't love writing about school shootings. I don't have a journal of all these scenes of different school shootings. I don't even want to write about it. But my hand is tied. If I want to get over this, this is how I'm dealing with it. And I may have an abridged version, and I may have a full version, and I may give the abridged version to my dad who wants to read it, because he doesn't know what it's about yet. And I haven't decided how to deal with that. I'm probably going to give him the uncensored version, but things are going to be broadcasted what it's about as it's leading up to the story, so he'll know what it's about. I don't think it'll be triggering for him, but again, broadcast, tag, warn, don't make fun of people who do get triggered by things. One of the things I brought up earlier about the whole everything is triggering all of a sudden, the really disgusting thing is when people start using, trigger warning ironically. And that's really upsetting, because then you're not even respecting the people who do get triggered by content, which is a legitimate thing that people go through, and I've seen it firsthand. And while I very rarely get triggered by anything, I can understand that other people do. and to avoid that content. It's just this whole irony thing. It's sort of like when I was in high school and people were saying, kill yourself, ironically. They didn't actually mean it. But it's just so upsetting that you don't respect the people who deal with that on a daily basis.
Hmm.
And so I really hope that people listening can back off on the fake irony and trying to be, hip and cool to the crowd by making fun of other people who do have to deal with this kind of thing on a daily basis. That would be what I hope the takeaway is from this episode. You can write about it, you can experience it, you can talk about it to other people, warn, broadcast, tag, and realize that not everyone is going to be of the opinion of you and not everyone is going to be affected by the same content as you. But I had nothing to say about any of this, obviously. Boy, wait till next week's episode. Or the fucking essay on next week's topic. But yeah, I didn't want to step on anyone else's toes in this segment. I just had a lot to say. I don't even know what's in the show notes.
No, it's good to get different perspectives on it. I'm going to jump in with some comments that we've been getting. Guildarts earlier wrote, "You are always going to offend someone." Or somebody.
Correct. Oh boy, is that true.
In his novel, the story is being told by someone outside of the main conflict. They will sometimes break in at the start of a chapter and tell you when something bad is coming. She will then tell you where the educational bits are. So kind of a convenient narrator for the reader to pull things back a bit as warnings or telegraphing a few things. That is one way of going about it.
I think it's hard to pull that off in writing without being too whimsical about it. It'd be interesting to read something that had a companion narrator, let's say. I don't see a whole lot of that.
Nothing really comes to mind in regards to literature, but I can think of several games that have the companion narrator that try to provide context for the main character and effectively the gamer.
I don't know if that often warns them of what's to come besides, oh, I sense danger lurking ahead, in the very general sense.
Or, hey, listen.
I don't remember any character ever saying that. Boy, the Dark Souls series could have really used a companion. Hey, don't take another step or you're going to get kicked off this ledge by a giant skeleton that's just out of frame. Because fuck you.
And because I've been playing it a lot recently, I know Destiny has the little companion bot, which helps provide certain context during some missions and helps fill in the storyline in some parts. And occasionally gives warnings, but of the same level of, I have a bad feeling about this. Gee, you think? Let's see. We also did get a commentary for this talking point earlier in the week via Facebook from Herbie Allen. His commentary in regards to this whole topic is, alls one must do is look upon banned books, which we actually haven't really talked upon yet in this context. Whatever caused a novel to be banned can turn out to be a trigger. Is that not a controversy in and of itself? I mean, what really qualifies as a trigger? Well, we've covered that now. Magic seems to be a trigger for religious people. I would personally lean more towards a squick in that context, but I know for some, yes, it could be a trigger. Look up Harry Potter. Yeah, in that context. I'm sorry, I'm reading through this and there's...
Yeah, you have to be careful what you're saying. That's a quote from him and what you're saying as what you're saying. Make sure you make that clear.
Yeah, I'm cutting in and out between his sentences and kind of providing my perspective, but there's also just a weird juxtaposition between that sentence and the one coming up, so it kind of made me pause because it was look up Harry Potter. That's in regards to the previous statement, but then
Okay,
there's
I wasn't the only person that got tripped up for a second on that.
the
Yes.
next part is child molestation is also a trigger. Look up I know why the caged bird sings. Race is a trigger also. Roll of thunder, hear my cry, or how to kill a mockingbird. For me, sparkles are a trigger. Look up Twilight. I get the context of that, and I'm going to lean more towards that's also a squick. I'm going to presume.
Or presume that he was saying that lightheartedly.
Yes.
Not sure.
I mean, the context of Twilight's creatures don't make me cringe, but for different reasons. I'm going to guess in regard compared to what he's trying to allude to. He then goes on, so what really is a trigger? That is the question. Death. Going to cut in, yes, death is definitely a trigger for several people. His example is The Book Thief, or any number of novels. The Holocaust, or The Boy in the Striped PJs. I think that might be a typo. He wrote The Boy in the Stripped PJs.
Yeah, it's the striped pajamas, I think.
Yeah.
That's the title.
Or abduction. Look up any number of thrillers or mysteries. If you look, they are all over. Banned books is a goldmine filled with triggers.
I would say more of a coal mine than a gold mine, but yeah, and actually, like the home invasion horror movies, that's really squicky for me, and I get really anxious when I watch those because I have my own issues with that kind of thing. But I also know one of my friends' wife, I think it was, when we were talking about these types of horror movies, she was like, absolutely not. No, do not show me any of this, because she gets extremely upset. You know, I'll get like anxious and uncomfortable, but I'll power through. But she would be devastated watching one of these movies, like The Stranger or whatever. I can't remember what that movie was.
Safe Room would probably be one.
Yeah, I was thinking more of a abduction and then systematic slaughtering of a little different than Safe Room or Panic Room, I think is what you're thinking of.
Yeah.
No, The Stranger. What was the movie that came out like 4 or 5 years ago where the people in masks came to these?
The Purge.
No, but way before that.
Oh.
People came to their house. I thought it was called The Strangers. There's like a group of teenagers that are all wearing masks. They went into this couple's house and tied them up and then systematically tortured them for the second half of the movie.
I tuned that one out entirely. I don't remember the name.
I can understand. Pretty troubling content. So yeah, but I knew what that movie was about going in.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that I could handle it, and I would never, present that movie in a movie marathon without telling people what it's about. Like, if I have a horror movie marathon, I usually provide people a list and have people vote on them, and X them out. Absolutely do not watch this.
And encourage them to ask questions if they're not familiar with a movie or what content may be in it.
Right. Like the controversial, especially now because Eli Roth's doing a bunch of stuff based on it, but like the original Cannibal Holocaust. It's a very awful movie, and it has scenes of actual animal torture in it, and that can be triggering for some people. So I like to make it very clear, if we're watching a legitimate horror movie and not just a funny like 70s slasher film, to tell them, look, this movie is actually fucked up. If you're interested in watching it with me, by all means, come on over and we'll have some popcorn and discuss about the global and cultural implications of this movie being made, and kind of talk about it from an educational standpoint, or don't. I will save this movie to the end and give people plenty of time to leave before I start this movie. In the meantime, we'll watch Jason X and we'll watch one of the Alien vs. Predator movies. You know, some lighthearted horror.
I'll stick to the campy horror. I'll stick to my Evil Dead.
I don't know. You should say your campy horror Evil Dead 2. I think people forget that Evil Dead 1 is a legitimate horror movie, and it's actually...
Yeah, the original Evil Dead wasn't as campy as its predecessors. Evil Dead 2 gets pretty campy. Evil Dead 3 is campy with a budget. And I have not seen the remake.
It is not campy. No.
It is not campy, and I knew that before even thinking about going into it, and from what I've heard, I don't think I'm going into that one.
It is extremely upsetting and violent.
Because it's so far away from campy.
It's very good, but for me.
Conversely, I was recently made aware that there's Ash versus the Evil Dead coming.
And that's going to be awesome.
And that makes me excited, because that's the type of campy horror that I enjoy. If they went the Evil Dead remake route, I would avoid it entirely. Because that is not triggering for me so much as extreme squick. Like, I would lose out on a lot of the enjoyment of it because I would be too uncomfortable. Which is why I do not really care for the Saw series. I consider that just torture porn.
To be fair.
The concept behind the first one I found clever.
Yes. The first one still is in like my top 20 horror movies.
And I respect it for that.
The rest of them, no.
Yeah, then they just continued it. So... I know Will had commentary in the show notes. I'm not sure how much of that you've already covered off on just in conversation, or if there's anything you want to pull out from there at the moment.
Most of it's been pretty much covered. Don't use triggers just for the sake of triggering people for entertainment value or shock value. I think we might have covered that. And yeah, I think that pretty much covers. I think we've pretty much covered everything I wanted to say. All around. Ironically, there's no controversy between the three of us on how to handle controversial content.
Because we actually follow through with what we talked about, and we acknowledge it, and we accept other people's potential opinions, and we're willing to discuss it reasonably, so long as certain content is made aware. If it's triggering, then yeah, we avoid that. But we've all been, at least our crew is familiar enough with each other at this point that we're aware of our respective triggers and squicks and everyone else's, so that we kind of know what to avoid, at least within our group.
Right. If I ever want to play a practical joke, which is probably unlikely in general because of everyone, including my propensity for anxiety, but if I wanted to play a practical joke, it would not involve a handful of fake rubber spiders, for example.
You're not going to pull a joke like Josh did in Until Dawn.
No.
Yeah, and look how that ended up for him. It's not worth it.
I will say I did have an example I thought of while Justin was talking about his story earlier of handling where I had to handle someone reacting to controversial content in my story, where they were reading through Roommate and they told me that they enjoyed the story up to that point, but then the way one of the characters was treating another character was making him uncomfortable, and he's like, I'm not sure I'm going to continue. And I was like, well, I respect that, that is what it is. I'm glad you enjoyed it up to now, I will say that, you know, it's not going to continue all the way through the end of the story. Things will get interesting. If you want to keep reading, go ahead. If not, I'm not insulted by that. And he did, or they did keep reading and did come back later and say, I'm glad I kept reading because I saw where you went with it. And approved of where I went with it. But I understood at the time what he was up to. It's like, yeah, it's a little squicky, a little... It can make someone be uncomfortable the way these two are reacting to each other.
Hmm.
But again, if you provide the context even soon after or, you know, well before, then that provides context to the reader to understand why those characters are behaving the way they do, like we discussed. So great. Everyone's in agreement.
Yay.
Hooray.
Now let's talk about the financial sheet that I have open on the other computer.
Spend all the money.
I'm
Yours.
not sure you haven't accomplished that yet, actually.
All right. And of course, to our viewers and listeners who have stuck it through with us over the past hour, I hope you were able to get something out of that, or at least were hopefully agreeing or acknowledging our opinions in regards to controversy versus Squicks versus triggers. And whatever your opinions may be, by all means, post in the comments, continue the conversation.
Actually, I'm going to bring up one more point before we totally close out, because I think this is important.
Fine.
Back when I joined the group early on, I was very crass in my humor and very not subtle and upfront and kind of harsh, because that's the way I roll with my friends. That's the way I grew up with my family, and I made people uncomfortable. And upon realizing that, I didn't say, well, fuck those guys. I'm going to, you know, be who I am and do my own thing. I realized, oh, you know what? I kind of was being a dick. Some people can't handle that sense of my humor. I'm going to tone it down. And then I went to those people and I apologized to them in person. And I said, look, this is how I grew up. My parents picked on me all the time in jest. I don't mean anything by it. I'm sorry, and it won't happen again. And I think that's important if you do end up accidentally triggering somebody or accidentally squicking somebody, to acknowledge that you've done that and to potentially apologize and let them know that you won't let that happen again, at least in front of them. I'm still going to call my other friends, you know, names and beat them up emotionally because we have that rapport with each other. And I'm not going to change that about myself because I have that weird sense of humor. But I don't impose that on other people that aren't on that same wavelength. And I think it's important for people who accidentally squick and trigger people to be very similar in regards. And I think the people that get squicked or triggered will be appreciative of that fact. There's a coworker, and I'll make this very quick because I know the podcast is going on. There's a coworker that I have that he will swear up and down, F word, C word, everything under the sun. But if you say, God damn it, he gets very upset because he's religious. And so what I do is I not say those things in front of him instead of doing what other people would do and double down and try to annoy the crap out of this person. And I think that's important to not antagonize other people. And I hope that our listeners don't do that. And that was my final point.
All right. With that, we're going to roll on to the highlights reel for this week. We only have a couple things to highlight. There's no new book bundles, so no new books for me. Although I apparently don't have book 4 in the series that I'm currently reading, so I'm eventually going to have to figure out what to do about that. Because I want to know what happens. Especially the way the third book left off. But that's for another time. Let's see here. First, we gotta hop onto screen share. first piece is there is a newly discovered tablet from the Epic of Gilgamesh. And new is kind of relative considering the age of the Epic of Gilgamesh. But it appears that there are 3 tablet fragments that have been found in regards to the Epic of Gilgamesh for Tablet 5 specifically, since they're on multiple tablets, and it actually gives greater detail and context in regards to that particular part of the story, which is really cool because the Epic of Gilgamesh is like one of the oldest stories that has survived the ages up to today. And
I found it interesting that the tablet gives new context to old characters, and there was some stuff revealed in this tablet that we wouldn't have known had we not found it.
And to me, it's kind of fascinating that the photo here, that's how small they were able to hand carve the text onto a stone tablet, and it is still decipherable now in modern day. They were able to translate it and figure it out where it was in relation to the whole story.
Well, they had CNC milling machines back then, right? I mean, that couldn't have been that hard.
No, one in every house.
Right. Okay, come on, that's hyperbolic. Not every house. Like, every, family, generational family probably had one.
All right, fair enough.
Can I just say that the story of how this museum acquired the tablet sounds like quite the story in and of itself?
Yes, it is very interesting.
Yeah, for those who don't have the time to read the article, they basically made it open season for those who would explore ruins and areas where these pieces could potentially be found, and basically didn't really ask questions as to how it was acquired. Just if you happen to find these pieces, it would be appreciated if you brought them to the museum or someone who works at the museum so they can look at them and see what the validity of them is. And they do not know exactly where these tablet fragments were found or under what conditions or situations, but they were brought to the museum, and one of the people was able to figure out what the significance of them was. And it was basically, don't ask questions, I don't care what the price is, just get them.
The article says this specific tablet fragment was purchased from smugglers at, I think it was $800.
Yeah.
Sure, it's actually worth a lot more than $800. It sounds like the exchange they were trying to negotiate down the price as one of the researchers was looking at the tablet, saw what the tablet really was, and just said, give him the money.
Yeah.
I don't care how much he asks for, just give him the money.
I'll explain later. And the article, at this point, it's not really spoilers in regards to who the characters in the Epic of Gilgamesh are. I think the story is old enough that this is going to be okay to point out some of the pieces they found in regards to how this story has changed thanks to these tablet fragments. But if you have not read the Epic of Gilgamesh and you want to avoid spoilers from however old this happens to be, ignore the next minute or so. But they basically found out that Gilgamesh and Enkidu saw monkeys as part of the exotic and noisy fauna of the cedar forest, which was not mentioned in previous versions of the epic, and it's kind of cool that they actually specifically call out monkeys, of all things, as being exotic and noisy within the cedar forest. And I have not admittedly read the full story of the Epic of Gilgamesh, so I forget the full context of why monkeys was significant. It's just cool that they learned that. And the character of Humbaba was not actually a barbarian ogre, but a foreign ruler who just happened to entertain with exotic music and court in the manner of Babylonian kings.
Yeah, dirty foreigner. No wonder he was called an ogre. Actually, I think that's part of the context of why people thought that it was an ogre because of some of the descriptions that were put upon that character in some of the other parts of the text.
But it's really cool that we managed to get a little more context of who that character was, and it kind of shifts some of the aspects of that character within the story. And apparently they also got some of the slaying of Humbaba better preserved now, which I'm sure is definitely appreciated because I don't know how many more tablet fragments they're going to be finding at any point. Because even though this one looks pretty well preserved, all things considered, I mean, yes, it's in 3 pieces, but that's a pretty significant amount of preserved tablet, all things considered, nowadays. I don't know how many more of those they're going to be able to unearth. The next article up is examining the fascinating typographic history of eye charts, which is actually pretty fascinating, or at least I found it fascinating because I never really thought about the typography of eye charts. But this article goes into pretty decent detail as to the history of typographic eye charts and what used to be used in the very early days of trying to figure out people's eyesight skills.
I would have failed every single eye test if that was the font they had used.
German ophthalmologist, so very German font. But it was interesting how even back then they determined to kind of scale the font size to figure out what a person's limits were, and there are various standards that were created over the years as to fonts to figure out how best to differentiate letters from a distance and what some of the differences in the typography happens to be, and just how they went about creating them and what the logic behind it was. I don't know, I thought it was very interesting to see, not just because my eyesight is horrible, but I never really thought about the history behind such things and just how much thought and effort was put into creating these charts to best determine what someone's visual acuity happens to be, and how to make it as accessible to everyone as possible. So I just thought it was a cool article and I wanted to share. It is a relatively, the E chart. That one I have never seen before, and I hope I never do, because that one would confuse the heck out of me.
That's the one that we had in our school.
It's explained that one is for people who either are illiterate or aren't familiar with the Latin lexicon.
Okay.
So they basically just point out which direction each E is pointing.
Or I guess it would be EW3M.
No, they're all E's. They're E's facing a different direction is the description.
Ah.
There's also below it the open circle chart, or broken circle chart, or something like that.
Yeah.
Which essentially the same thing.
I might have trouble with that one. Especially the smaller fonts. Although you have a 25% chance of getting it right. And both of these articles are in the show notes for episode 111 of Word Ninjas Live if you want to check them out. Those are the only highlights we happen to have for this week. And with that, it's time to roll on into the Productivity and Inspiration Station. Because we've all been doing things and being productive. As for myself, over the weekend I survived a 2-day tag sale of selling all of the baubles and helping people move stuff to the cars, unearthing things within a basement of doom. It was interesting, mainly just to see what people would take. Like an entire case of cranberry sauce, which was not expected. And I'm taking a break this week just to catch up on various works and stuff while I have recording time. But last week I was still enjoying Destiny's story with the newest expansion. It's still pretty fragmented just because of the way the game is set up in regards to gameplay, but the app that they have actually helps because whenever I acquire the Grimoire cards, which helps expand the universe and lore, I can kind of read through that at my leisure and kind of cross reference stuff to figure out context. And over the course of the weekend, I unearthed a homemade light box for sketching, and I managed to clean it up and make sure that it works and isn't going to spontaneously combust or anything. But I wouldn't mind trying to figure out how to do that myself now that I see how it was kind of gone, how the person went about it. So that may be a project at some point. Although I'd probably utilize a different lamp socket because that's what they use. They just use the lamp socket and then set it up within a box with glass. But I'd probably use a 3 bulb lamp socket just so you could better diffuse the light because the way this one happens to be created is a little funky. And I just had one of my regular reality checks as to just how crazy next year is going to be in regards to the change of the status quo, in that the status quo is not going to be status quo anymore. It's going to be there is no status quo for next year. It's just everything changes.
Wait, what? I thought earlier today we were discussing not to change everything and to go with the static quo. Status quo.
Nope. Everything changes. The status
See,
quo is gone.
just like before, CJ and I always differing on our opinions.
You can have the status quo, and I'll do the polar opposite.
But you own the status quo. It's in your name. You'd have to sell it to me. Anyways, we're getting off topic. Yes, 2016 is going to be very interesting.
Yeah.
Very fun.
What has Will been up to since last week?
Aside from dealing with spontaneous cold of annoyingness, I completely finished and posted up to my Patreon chapter 30 of My Roommate's a Stripper, which is exciting in and of itself. But when I sat down and looked at all of the few remaining things I need to discuss and cover in the story, as well as how far I've gotten so far, I think there may only be about 2 chapters left. That's
Oh my.
about as much content as I have in my head, unless I come up with something. But I don't think I need to come up with anything. I think I've covered all my bases.
Surprise, it was all a dream.
Cue extended coda.
I actually thought about doing the it was all a dream scenario for the ending, and then I told that to somebody, and then they threatened to beat me over the head with the shoe.
I would have provided the shoe.
So, no, I'm not doing the it's only a dream ending. But I did almost do that.
Instead, you're rewriting the beginning so that one of your characters has amnesia.
I mean, I could. Just yesterday, I wrote an entire 11-page, 6,400-word short story, flash fiction, whatever you want to call it. Wrote it, edited it, and posted it up to the internet all in about half a day.
Nice.
I just sat down, and I had the idea in my head. I had already planned it out. I'm like, I'm writing this, I'm doing it. So I just had a day of writing and just made it happen, and it felt really good to be like super productive. And I'm hoping to be able to have more of those, where I just write an entire thing in a day. And other than that, I managed to maintain my 1-week buffer on game break despite illness making me not want to speak. That was the only part I had trouble with, was like I have to record commentary for the footage I have, but I'm sneezing and coughing every 30 seconds.
And then you only speak for 20 seconds.
But I managed to get it done, and I have another episode. I have an episode completed before the previous episode is even up, though it should have gone up yesterday.
It did.
But I already have next week's episode done. So, yay!
Yay.
Yay, buffers. And that's pretty much it.
And what has Justin been up to since last week?
I have been a busy bee. I'm still and actually further ahead of schedule in my own personal Academy of Excellence, in which I'm trying to self-teach myself some important skills, and so that's very exciting. Hopefully, the content that I'm going through gets harder, and I think it will, because these are all the introductory stuff. I just started like 2 weeks ago. I also had a list of 58 things that I wanted to accomplish last weekend, and I got a lot of them done, not all of them, but all of the ones that were going to be a real pain in the ass, I got all of those done, so that was a huge accomplishment. Uh, and at one point, I was cleaning out some glass bottles with some OxyClean, and I spilled some OxyClean on the floor and had left it there overnight. And I came in the next morning, and that part of the floor was 4 shades brighter than the rest of the floor. So I'm like, damn it, and I have to clean the entire floor, which had never been done since we moved in. So I went in and I did 3 coats of OxyClean and mopping and just went to town on it. And it looks great. And I don't know if I'd eat off it because there's probably some deep staining in there that I'm not interested in getting. But uh, very accomplished doing that. That was one of the things I was always dreading and putting off longer and longer. So it was a happy accident, and it was nice that it happened on the weekend. I was planning on being productive anyways.
Nice.
And I've got another similarly free weekend coming up where I have no plans and I can finish out the rest of that list of things to do.
What? You mean you're
Oh,
not working?
well, let's talk about that later. That still remains to be seen. Maybe I'll just put in a lot of overtime next week. So the thing is I've just been keeping the train rolling. I've been pretty inspired and working really hard and trying to get my life together and figure out what I want to do for my future and trying to prepare for that. And things have been going good on that. And as for the inspiration side of things, I was really inspired by next week's topic. Probably because it was my topic, but I wrote a lot about it. I don't know. Are we telling people what next week's topic is?
Yeah, we can tease that.
Okay, so we are going to be talking about fan service and what place in modern society fan service can play a role in. And I've researched and talked about many points of view, positive and negative, and I expect the conversation to be similarly controversial, but probably not as triggering, but it will definitely be about fan service of all kinds, including sexual, and probably especially sexual. So if you're kind of sensitive to that kind of thing, maybe you skip next episode, or at least listen in, but don't watch any of the supplemental videos that we won't be playing on the air, but will be in the show notes. And
Maybe just
I've
listen to the audio version of it.
right, and I've spoiler alerted all of the references that I pulled. So if you follow along the show notes, you'll be pretty safe. So yeah, I got really into that, and I'm
Nice.
kind of on both people's sides. So we can talk about our various opinions on that.
All right. That'll be fun. All right, with that, moving on to events. NaNoWriMo is looming.
No,
We basically have a month. Since
no,
October starts tomorrow.
stop.
We basically have a
Wait, is
month.
tomorrow October?
Yeah, I think tomorrow is October 1st.
Oh, fuck.
How
Yeah.
much is, or as Tumblr is calling it, the first of Halloween.
I thought Halloween started 2 months ago.
No, that's as far as major shopping centers are concerned.
Yeah.
Damn, it's going to be October, and just yesterday it was 75 degrees all night.
Ugh.
And tonight it's going to be like 50.
Uh, yeah, National Novel Writing Month is a month away, starting in November.
Ooh.
For those not familiar with it, it is a month-long writing challenge, 50,000 words in 30 days, or 1,667 words a day on average. And I've already figured out a half dozen or so events for our region. I need to finish that up within the next week or so we're all good to go. And eventually figure out what the hell I'm doing for my Nano. Because I haven't really thought about that. So I have a whole month to figure that out, thankfully. But that's a thing that's coming up. And then, of course, for next year, our convention schedule only has EuroMiniCon in January and Kineticon in July. There are potential others, but they're far enough away into the back end of 2016 that we don't have details on those yet. But with that, that is a show. That is all we have to throw at you in regards to controversy, squicks, triggers, highlights, stuff we've been up to, and events. So with that, thank you all for joining us for episode 111 of Word Ninjas Live. If we have entertained you in any way, shape, or form over the last hour and a half, you're welcome to check out all of the previous episodes and other shenanigans we get up to via our YouTube channel. You can watch them, comment them, even thumbs up them if you happen to enjoy them a lot. You can also talk to us on social media. We're over on Twitter at FCWordNinja, on Tumblr, fcwordninja.tumblr.com, and Facebook, facebook.com/fullcoveragewriters. And if you want to help fund all of the crazy various endeavors that we're up to, go check out the Etsy store, etsy.com/shop/fullcoveragewriters. Various holidays are impending for the last quarter of 2015, so if you are on the hunt for shiny baubles for others, go check out the Etsy store. See if anything might either pique your interest or potentially pique their interest.
I was just reading a survey last week that 1 out of 10 creative people, their number one thing on their wish list is a Ninja Cube.
It's a good thing we have a few in stock then.
Yeah.
And
Scientific fact to me.
we recently acquired more fabric than even Ed will know what to do with. So much fabric. So I don't think you're going to have to worry about running out of materials for those anytime soon. So order as many as you like. And if you want to track me down, it's pretty hard lately. Justin can attest to that. But your best bet is my personal Tumblr, which is fancypantswolf.tumblr.com. Where can people track down Will?
You can usually find me on my Tumblr page at darkholm.tumblr.com. I had an itch there. I try to keep things updated on My Roommate's a Stripper at myroommate'sastripper.tumblr.com. And you can always support me on my Patreon page at patreon.com/darkhom, where the new chapter and that little short story flash fiction are both recently posted up for subscribers, patrons,
Nice.
whatever they want to call them.
And where can people track down Justin?
As always and usual, you can find me at mechanicaljustin.com, where hopefully I'll be posting a lot more soon. And next week, I will be providing my Mario Maker levels. I finally finished a whole world.
Nice.
So I'll be providing the codes for that, and people can star or not star if they hate them, and play them and comment. And then one day CJ will come over and try to play them and see if he can get past the first enemy.
Yeah, I don't know about that, considering how my previous attempt went.
That was bad. That was one I designed for my wife. And you couldn't even beat it.
I think I did beat the first, or the level 1-1 at least.
I was being hyperbolic.
1-2, though, I probably would have trouble with. And I found it amusing that we just had a sale on the Etsy store.
Just now?
Just now.
Awesome.
Someone just purchased a set of 6 writing-inspired stickers.
Well, there we go.
So
We sell stickers now?
we've had those stickers for a while now.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, they come in a set of 6.
This is why I need a list of inventory.
Well, go check out the Etsy store and you'll see what we got.
Ooh, good idea. I'll do that.
With that, we are all going to sign off for the week. And we will see you all for episode 112 of Word Ninjas Live, where Justin's going to be taking over.
Yep, a hostile takeover.
That hasn't happened in a while.
I'll be leading the charge.
So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, go do something creative this week, so we can talk about it next week.
Hooray.
Especially if it's fan service related. Then it's contextual. Until then, have a good week, everyone. Thinking about how some people have differences of opinions on how math should work, which is, I feel like, one of the most basic black and white concepts the global society has. It's one of the few things we as humans pretty much agree on nowadays. That basically
As long as you don't bring up the metric system versus the English system, then you're usually fine.
Well, that's more measurements than
math.
arithmetic. But I was thinking basically anything that falls under the PEMDAS rules is basically globally accepted as truth. Except for some people who now question why 1 times 1 equals 1 rather than 2.
And also, I was reading an article just recently about something about the stock market, and when the information...
How it's crappy?
No. Hey, I'm on the stock market. So, when a piece of information was released, within 4 nanoseconds, some people in, I think, Chicago made some transactions to capitalize on that information. However, they were far enough away where 4 nanoseconds was faster than the speed of light it would take for that information to travel, so they could prove that there's insider trading, because they wouldn't have been able to get that information just physically. And, of course, lawyers tried to change the laws of physics and say that it was possible, and that didn't work. And some people might remember when the gravitational constant was changed at one point by our Congress. It was quickly reversed, but at one point there was some law, I don't remember why they changed it, but it benefited a lawyer in some way, I'm sure, or his client.
It was an absurd phrasing, I think, from what I remember about that.
Yeah, it was something about, I don't even know, I don't even want to make a guess.
It was not intended, as far as I could tell.
No. And so I would consider those two things extremely controversial because I am math, and I don't like when math is abused.
You're a math man?
Yes. I don't like when you have a differential equation and you divide both sides by dx. That's not an arithmetic operator. That's a shortcut.
Wrong?
That's a shortcut for people, but it's not arithmetic. You can't do that. It's not a thing.
Can we divide it by 0 instead?
You actually can. We've actually have rules about that, and you can do that. But you cannot divide. It'd be like dividing an equation by the integral symbol. That no, stop, no. So yes, even something as forefront as math, something that we as a global society have agreed upon thousands of years ago, can be controversial.
The audience that views it. So it's effectively unavoidable.
The way I sort of handle it in my own works is that I try to realize who my audience is when I'm writing, and I try to write to cater to that audience somewhat. And if there's going to be something controversial, I try to lead up to it so that somebody can get comfortable knowing that it's going to come up, or they can just abandon ship before it gets too heady.
Or it's something that's most likely going to appear soon.
Right. And also, like the aforementioned novel that I'm writing, that's going to be something that's basically going to be on the inside cover as like the little synopsis. Hey, this happens like basically immediately. So enter at your own risk. And I think as artists, we should be talking about things that are occasionally upsetting and occasionally controversial. I think that's part of the art, and I think that's how humanity ultimately deals with these controversial topics through reading and through catharsis. And if somebody knows that they're going to have, like a panic attack reading, or watching the movie Arachnophobia, then they should probably not watch Arachnophobia instead of trying to ban the movie Arachnophobia from all video stores and digital media.
I highly regretted ever watching that movie.
It's actually kind of comical in modern day.
It probably does
not for some of us,
well, but for the time.
Yes. You probably weren't a huge fan of that one scene in The Thing either.
I don't think I've seen that. Or at least not that I remember.
I won't ruin it on the podcast because it's a very good scene.
Fair enough. Then you'd create controversy.
Yes. Oh man, the spoiler controversy. Like, you can't spoil anything that was, like, the Captain Phillips movie when that came out. People were complaining about spoilers, even though it was a historical event. Everyone knows how it ends already. And it was in the newspapers, like, just a year ago. And so I think we're at the point, and this is where things are going to get controversial and we're going to get a lot of angry emails. I'm of the opinion that we try to latch on to as much controversy as we can for the sake of being part of a conversation. And I think that a lot of people that are, what would be the verb for controversial? I don't want to say contrived because that's a different word. But anyways, people who find something controversial and have to post about it on Tumblr or Twitter or some social media are not actually really offended and almost rarely actually affected by whatever.
Greetings and salutations, viewers and listeners. Welcome to episode 111 of Word Ninjas Live. We're 11D1 today. And we're taking on some very heavy topics this week. So kind of as a preemptive warning, we are covering controversial content, squicks, and triggers this week, and just what is the differentiation between the three different concepts? How do they all intermix, or how are they different? And how can we handle them in our literature, in our art, in all the creative things that we do? It's not going to be an easy topic, but it's something that should be addressed and thought about and discussed. But if you have significant issues with talks about triggers or anything, this is your warning now. If you want to skip it, we understand, but we're going to dive into it. But first, hey, how about we introduce ourselves before I forget and just jump right in. I'm your instigator of creative and literary insanity, as always, Charles. Joining me tonight are my brave co-hosts, Will.
Hello, everyone.
And a very tired Justin.
Yep, I'm also here, but I'm good to go. We're good.
Does that mean that you want to start things off if you're so good?
No. I don't have a whole lot of personal experience with this topic, so I'm going to make uninformed commentary that people can correct me on.
You've never done anything controversial ever in any of your writing?
Oh, no, I have, but if you're going to talk about the differences, I have things to say, but they're probably not going to be received well. So I'll let you guys lead, and I'll poke in every now and then with my own comments.
So you're going to create the controversy as examples during the show?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's start things off with just what actually constitutes controversial content. which is actually the hardest of the three to pin down because effectively almost anything, or basically anything, can be controversial. Because controversy basically boils down to differences. And for artistic and creative endeavors, it basically would fall under differences in demographics that society or culture deems a minority, unusual, potentially unwanted, or even idolized. It can go in the opposite direction as well. I was thinking on my way home that it's basically anything that does not have a black or white answer or reasoning behind it can become controversial. But then I thought, even recently, we've been reading.
The real question is, how do we handle the controversy?
Obviously, by having completely respectable and honest discussions with people, where we give our opinions and then listen to other people's opinions and respect those opinions, and everyone gets along, even if they disagree.
I want to live in that world.
Might be a little boring, but that would be nice.
Probably
Sorry,
get a lot more done. Oh, I always just like to think as controversial as anything where multiple people can have differing opinions on it and believe strongly on their opinion of it. You've got controversy. And unfortunately, that can be pretty much everything.
Yeah,
apparently.
any unyielding opinion held by somebody will become a controversial anything down the line.
Yep.
I mean, the big heavy hitters that most people acknowledge as controversial are like religion and politics, and sometimes sports.
That's why I don't talk about religion, politics, or sports.
And
basically, things to avoid at work or family functions.
Yes, I think I made it clear to CJ like a year ago, or even longer, when I joined in to this group. No religion and politics, ever. Ever. Unless you're writing about a book that has religious and or political content. Then you could discuss it. In the context of the text that you're writing. And we've done, I think we're 100% on that. Even this episode, I think we're going to avoid all that discussion.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a note of it. I'm not really going to dive into specific controversies within sports and or politics. Or
really
religion or any of those things. Although politics is becoming a sport the way things are going.
Oh, great. Now he's made a controversial opinion.
We're doomed.
Wow.
Well, I filled that part of the talkie point then. Then someone else has to create a squick, and then someone else will have to be triggered, and we'll have the trifecta.
Actually, I will be talking about a novel that I'm writing currently that has a massive trigger in the first chapter.
Well, that leaves the Squicks to Will then.
I'm good at Squicks.
Before we dive into Squicks, just how has controversial content been handled in stories and other creative endeavors in the past within our own works, and how do we feel we could handle that or suggest others handle that? Because basically everything and anything can be controversial depending on
the conversation that they're talking about. They just like to be on a bandwagon and be along for the ride.
It's very true.
You can send all angry emails to charlesmuir@hotmail.com.
I feel sorry for that person.
That's kind of the thing, though, if you're going to make controversial content, you have to expect people to be angry with you for expressing your side of the controversy. Because there are people that are going to agree with you that are already on your side. There are people who are going to be like, whatever, maybe they'll be informed and agree with you and join your side or just not care. And then there are the people who are going to disagree with you. And because internet, they are going to be very vehemently vocal about their disagreement with you. and you just have to take that in stride and be like, well, that's your opinion and this is my opinion, and if you don't like it, don't read my book. But we should definitely not ban or silence the talk about controversial content, because it's through talking about it that eventually maybe an outcome can be reached.
Or at least a mutual understanding of the topic.
Yeah. Some kind of agreement.
Because even with things like mathematics, it is not always black and white. There are multiple possible ways you can talk about it and multiple opinions you can have about it while still being correct or potentially right on all sides, even if you vehemently disagree with each other.
Right, and there's often cultural differences, and yeah, I sort of hate that cop-out where it's a different culture, you have to accept it for what it is, because for some stuff, no, I don't really have to. But I'm also not over there, yelling at people for their culture. I don't hang out in the Bible Belt yelling at televangelists. I don't care. You can do whatever you want. It's not bothering me. And if people want to give you money for faith, then go for it. Whatever. I don't have a problem with it. And that's kind of how I take my stand on most things. I really don't care. It doesn't affect me. And I wish more people felt like I did, where it just stop caring. And go ahead.
I think there's a big difference in accepting the controversy and just acknowledging the controversy, like based on culture or religion or politics or whatever. You don't have to accept someone else's position if it's like the polar opposite of yours, as if you really seriously can't understand why they would take that position. So long as you acknowledge it. There is a big difference between acknowledgement and acceptance. And I think most cultures seem to automatically ignore